The cowboy offered love, not just shelter. At 18, she became a mail-order bride. Sarah Mitchell's hands trembled as she counted the coins spread across the small wooden table in their cramped Boston apartment. $3.47. That was all that remained after paying this week's rent. She looked over at her mother, lying on the thin mattress in the corner, her chest rising and falling with labored breaths. The coughing had gotten worse again. They needed more medicine, but the doctor wanted $2 just for a visit. It was March of 1885, and the cold still crept through the cracks in the walls of their tiny two-room home. Sarah pulled her shawl tighter around her shoulders and glanced at her younger brother and sister huddled by the small stove. 10-year-old Emma was trying to read by the dim lamplight, while 12-year-old Thomas pretended to do his schoolwork, though Sarah knew he was probably just as worried about their situation as she was. 6 months had passed since their father died in an accident at the shipyard. One moment he was a strong, healthy man who provided for his family, and the next, he was gone. The company gave them $20 and their condolences. $20 to make up for a lifetime of lost wages and love. Sarah had been 17 then, forced to become the head of the household overnight. She had found work at the textile factory within a week of her father's death. The job required her to stand for 12 hours straight, breathing in cotton dust, operating dangerous machines that had already claimed fingers and hands from other workers. The noise was deafening, and the heat in summer was unbearable, but it paid $4 a week, and that was more than most women could hope for. For a while they managed. Sarah worked, her mother took in some mending when she felt strong enough, and they scraped by. But then winter came, and with it, her mother's illness. What started as a cold turned into something much worse. The doctor said it was tuberculosis, though he whispered the word as if saying it too loudly might make it spread faster. He prescribed medicine and rest, two things that cost money they did not have. Sarah took on extra shifts at the factory. She worked until her fingers bled and her back screamed in pain. She skipped meals to make sure Emma and Thomas had enough to eat. She patched their clothes so many times that the patches had patches, but it was never enough. The medicine ran out. The rent came due. The landlord started making threats about throwing them into the street. One particularly difficult evening, after her mother had a severe coughing fit that left blood on her handkerchief, Sarah walked the cold streets of Boston trying to clear her head. She passed by well-dressed ladies with their servants, warm houses with light glowing from every window, restaurants where people ate meals that cost more than her weekly wages. The unfairness of it all pressed down on her chest until she could barely breathe. She found herself at the public library, seeking warmth and a moment of escape from her troubles. While sitting at one of the long wooden tables, she noticed a newspaper someone had left behind. Normally, Sarah did not have time to read newspapers. Her days were consumed with work and worry. But something made her pick it up that night. As she flipped through the pages, her eyes landed on a section she had never noticed before. It was filled with advertisements from men out west seeking wives. Mail-order bride advertisements, they were called. Sarah had heard whispers about such arrangements from other women at the factory, always spoken with a mixture of fascination and disapproval. Most of the advertisements were brief and businesslike. Miner seeks wife. Must be healthy and willing to work. Farmer needs woman for cooking and cleaning. Children a possibility. They read more like job postings than marriage proposals, and Sarah felt a chill run down her spine at the impersonal nature of it all. But then one advertisement caught her eye. It was different from the others, longer and more thoughtful. Rancher in Montana Territory seeks honest, hard-working wife. I am 2 years old, own a cattle ranch, and live a simple but decent life. I am looking for a true partner, not just a housekeeper. I promise to provide a home, protection, and respect. I believe in treating people fairly and keeping my word. If you are looking for a fresh start and willing to work hard, please write to James Hartley. Sarah read the advertisement 3 times. There was something about the way it was written that felt different. This man was not just looking for a servant or someone to cook his meals. He was looking for a partner. He mentioned respect, something Sarah had seen precious little of in her 18 years. She carefully tore out the advertisement, her heart pounding. What was she thinking? She could not just run off to Montana Territory to marry a complete stranger. That was insane. It was dangerous. It was desperate. But as she walked home that night, the paper folded in her pocket, she could not stop thinking about it. What did she have to lose? If she stayed in Boston, her mother would die because they could not afford proper medical care. Emma and Thomas would end up in factories or worse. They might all end up on the streets when the landlord finally made good on his threats. The idea haunted her for 3 days. She went to work, came home, cared for her mother, and thought about Montana. She imagined wide open spaces, clean air, a place where tuberculosis might not spread so easily. She imagined sending money back to her family, real money, enough to pay for doctors and medicine and food. On the 4th day, she made her decision. She would write to this James Hartley and see if he was serious about his offer. Sarah had never been good with words, and she certainly had never written to a man before. She sat up late by candlelight, drafting and redrafting her letter. She did not want to sound too desperate, but she needed to be honest about her situation. She explained about her father's death, her mother's illness, her responsibilities to her siblings. She told him she was 18, healthy, and willing to work hard. She admitted she had no experience with ranch life, but promised she was a quick learner. What she did not mention was how frightened she was, how she sometimes woke up in the middle of the night in a panic about their future, or how she had started to forget what it felt like not to be worried about money. She mailed the letter with the last few pennies she could spare and tried not to think about it. 3 weeks passed. Sarah had almost convinced herself that he would never respond, that maybe the advertisement had been old, or he had already found someone else. Then, on a gray Tuesday afternoon, the postman delivered a thick envelope addressed to her in unfamiliar handwriting. Sarah's hands shook as she opened it, in the privacy of her small room. Inside was a letter, written in neat, careful script, and a train ticket. James Hartley's letter was warm and thoughtful. He thanked her for her honesty about her situation and expressed sympathy for her mother's illness. He told her about his ranch, about the hard work, but also the beauty of Montana. He described the mountains, the vast sky, the peace of it all. He was honest, too, admitting that ranch life could be lonely and difficult, especially for someone used to city living. But what struck Sarah most was his kindness. He wrote that he understood if she was uncertain, that this was a big decision. He had enclosed a train ticket with an open date, so she could come when and if she was ready. He also included $20, asking her to please use it for her mother's medicine, whether she decided to come west or not. Sarah sat on her bed and cried. She could not remember the last time someone had shown her such kindness, such understanding. This stranger in Montana had given her money expecting nothing in return, simply because she needed it. That night, she talked to her mother. Despite her illness, her mother's mind was still sharp. She held Sarah's hand and told her that she should go, that this might be the opportunity they had all been praying for. Her aunt, her mother's sister, had reluctantly agreed to take in the family if Sarah could send money for their keep. The decision was made. Sarah would go to Montana Territory. She would marry James Hartley, a man she had never met. She would leave behind everything she knew for the chance at something better. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur. Sarah gave notice at the factory, packed her few belongings into a single carpet bag, and made arrangements for her family. She used the money James had sent to buy medicine for her mother and pay the rent ahead for 1 month. She held Emma and Thomas close, promising them she would send for them as soon as she could, that this was not goodbye forever. The morning she left, her mother was having a good day. She sat up in bed and took both of Sarah's hands in hers. "You are the bravest person I know," she said. "Your father would be so proud of you. Go and build a good life, and do not worry about us. We will be fine." Sarah kissed her mother's forehead, hugged her siblings one last time, and walked out the door with her carpet bag and her ticket west. As the train pulled away from Boston Station, Sarah watched the only city she had ever known disappear into the distance. She clutched the letter from James Hartley and looked at the small photograph he had included. It showed a tall man with kind eyes standing beside a weathered barn, mountains visible in the background. She had no idea if she was making the right decision. She was terrified, but she was also, for the first time in months, hopeful. Maybe this stranger in Montana could offer her not just survival, but a real chance at life. Maybe sometimes the bravest thing a person could do was take a leap of faith into the unknown. As the train carried her westward toward her uncertain future, Sarah allowed herself to imagine what might be waiting for her in Montana Territory. The train journey to Montana Territory took 3 long weeks, and every mile carried Sarah further from everything she had ever known. She shared a cramped passenger car with dozens of other travelers, all heading west for their own reasons. The wooden bench seats were hard and uncomfortable, and sleep came in brief, restless moments when exhaustion finally overcame the constant rattling and swaying of the train. Sarah had packed simple food for the journey, bread and cheese and dried fruit, trying to make it last as long as possible. When her supplies ran low, she spent precious pennies at station stops for whatever she could afford. She watched her fellow passengers carefully, learning quickly which people to avoid and which ones might be safe to talk to. Among the travelers were 3 other young women, all around her age, also heading west as mail-order brides. They found each other naturally, drawn together by their shared circumstances and uncertainty. There was Margaret, Irish girl with red hair and a quick laugh, who was going to meet a shopkeeper in Denver. Then there was quiet, serious Ruth, traveling to Wyoming to marry a widowed farmer with 3 children. And finally there was Catherine, bold and adventurous, who openly admitted she was looking for excitement and a fresh start after some unnamed trouble back home in Philadelphia. The 4 of them sat together when they could, sharing food and stories, trying to ease each other's fears with conversation and companionship. Margaret talked endlessly about the dresses she hoped to buy once she was settled. Ruth worried constantly about whether the farmer's children would accept her. Catherine made jokes about everything, though Sarah sometimes caught a glimpse of real fear beneath her cheerful exterior. "Are you scared?" Ruth asked Sarah one evening as the train rumbled through endless plains. Sarah thought about lying, about pretending to be brave. But these women understood what she was going through in a way no one else could. "Terrified," she admitted. "I keep thinking about what happens if he is not the person he seemed to be in his letters. What if I made a terrible mistake?" "We all might have," Catherine said with a shrug, though her hands twisted nervously in her lap. "But what choice did we have, really? Stay back east and starve slowly, or take a chance on something different?" Margaret nodded enthusiastically. "My father always said fortune favors the bold. We are being bold, are we not? Going off to marry strangers in wild territories? Or incredibly foolish," Ruth said quietly, but there was a small smile on her face. They talked late into the night, sharing their hopes and fears, their dreams of what their new lives might hold. Sarah found herself telling them about her mother's illness, about Emma and Thomas, about the crushing responsibility she had carried for months. It felt good to share the weight of it with someone who might understand. As the days passed and the landscape changed from cities to farmland to vast empty plains, Sarah found herself studying the photograph of James Hartley more and more frequently. She tried to read his character in his face, in the way he stood, in the background details of the image. The barn behind him looked well-maintained. His clothes were simple but clean. His eyes seemed kind, but could a photograph really tell you anything about a person's true nature? She reread his letters too, analyzing every word. He wrote about his parents who had died of cholera when he was 25, leaving him the ranch they had worked so hard to build. He mentioned books he enjoyed reading during long winter evenings. He talked about the satisfaction of honest work and the beauty of watching storms roll across the mountains. His words painted a picture of a thoughtful, solitary man who was lonely but not desperate, hopeful but realistic. But words on paper could lie, Sarah reminded herself. People could pretend to be anything in letters. The train made many stops along the way, and at each one Sarah watched the landscape transform. The crowded eastern cities gave way to smaller towns, then to settlements that barely deserved to be called towns at all. The trees became scarcer, the sky bigger, the land more open and wild. Sarah had never seen so much space in her entire life. In Boston, buildings crowded together, blocking out the sky. Here, the sky seemed to go on forever. At one stop, Margaret got off to meet her shopkeeper in Denver. She hugged each of them fiercely, making them promise to write if they could. Sarah watched her walk toward a well-dressed man waiting on the platform, saw them greet each other awkwardly, and wondered if that would be her in a few more days. 2 stops later, Ruth departed for Wyoming. She looked small and frightened as she stepped off the train, carrying her worn suitcase toward a tall, thin man with 3 children clustered around him. Sarah said a silent prayer that Ruth would find happiness, or at least safety. Catherine stayed on the train until they reached the Idaho Territory, where she was meeting a man who ran a hotel. Before she left, she squeezed Sarah's hand hard. "Be smart," she whispered. "If something feels wrong when you get there, do not be afraid to leave. Promise me." Sarah promised, though she had no idea where she would go or what she would do if things went badly. She had spent nearly all her money, or she had no family or friends within 1,000 miles. She was completely on her own now. The last few days of the journey were the loneliest. Without her traveling companions, Sarah had nothing to do but think and worry. She practiced what she would say when she first met James. She imagined different scenarios, some hopeful, some frightening. She wondered if she should have asked more questions in her letters, if she should have waited longer before agreeing to come. But there was no turning back now. The train carried her forward mile after mile toward whatever future awaited her. Finally, on a bright afternoon in early April, the conductor walked through the car announcing they would soon arrive in Bozeman, Montana. Sarah's stomach twisted with anxiety. She smoothed her best dress, the one she had carefully kept clean for this moment. She repinned her hair, trying to look presentable despite 3 weeks of train travel. Her hands would not stop shaking. When the train finally pulled into the station, Sarah forced herself to stand and gather her carpet bag. She stepped onto the platform with her heart pounding so hard she thought it might burst from her chest. The Bozeman station was smaller than she had expected, just a simple wooden building with a covered platform. There were perhaps 30 people waiting, some greeting arriving passengers, others waiting to board. Sarah scanned the crowd, looking for the face from the photograph, and then she saw him. James Hartley stood near the edge of the platform, his hat in his hands, his eyes searching the departing passengers. He was taller than she had imagined, well over 6 feet, with broad shoulders that spoke of years of physical labor. His face was weathered and tanned from outdoor work, with small lines around his eyes from squinting into the sun. He wore simple clothes, clean but clearly well worn, the clothes of a working man. Their eyes met across the platform, and for a moment neither of them moved. Sarah saw recognition in his face, and something else. Relief, maybe, or hope. James walked toward her slowly, as if afraid she might bolt like a frightened animal. When he reached her, he stopped a respectful distance away and gave a small, awkward bow. "Miss Mitchell?" His voice was deep and quiet, with a slight accent she could not quite place. "Yes." "Mr. Hartley?" Her own voice came out barely above a whisper. "James, please." He smiled, and it transformed his serious face into something warm and approachable. "May I carry your bag?" Sarah nodded, not trusting herself to speak. She handed him her carpet bag, which suddenly felt very light compared to the weight of what she was about to do. They walked to a wagon waiting nearby, and James helped her up onto the seat before loading her bag in the back. He climbed up beside her and took the reins, clicking softly to the 2 horses. As they pulled away from the station heading out of town, Sarah gripped the edge of the wooden seat and tried to breathe normally. For several minutes they rode in silence. Sarah did not know what to say, and apparently neither did James. She snuck glances at him from the corner of her eye, trying to reconcile this real man with the image she had built in her mind from letters and a photograph. Finally, James cleared his throat. "The journey was very long, I expect. Are you tired?" 3 weeks on a train is longer than I imagined. I am sure it was difficult. Did you have any trouble along the way?" "I traveled with some other women for most of the journey. That helped." James nodded. "That is good. I worried about you traveling alone for so long." Another silence fell. Sarah watched the landscape roll by, so different from anything she had ever seen. The sky stretched endlessly above them, a brilliant blue she had never witnessed through Boston's coal smoke and fog. Mountains rose in the distance, their peaks still white with snow. The air smelled clean and fresh, carrying scents of grass and earth. "Tell me about your mother," James said suddenly. "How was she when you left?" The question surprised Sarah. She had expected him to ask about the journey, or the weather, or any number of polite, meaningless things. Instead, he asked about what really mattered to her. "She had a good day when I left," Sarah said, and felt tears prick her eyes at the memory. "The medicine you sent helped her very much. I cannot thank you enough for that kindness." "You already thanked me in your letter," James said gently. "You do not need to thank me again. I only hope it continues to help her. I sent the rest of the money to my aunt with instructions to buy more when it runs out. I will send more as soon as I can." "Of course. Your family is your responsibility. I understand that." They talked more as the wagon rolled along the dirt road. James asked about Emma and Thomas, about what Sarah liked to read, about whether she had ever ridden a horse. Sarah found herself relaxing slightly. His questions were thoughtful, and he actually listened to her answers, asking follow-up questions that showed he was genuinely interested. Sarah, in turn, asked about the ranch, about Montana, about his daily life. James answered honestly, not painting things to be better than they were. He told her the work was hard and constant, that winters could be brutal, that the nearest neighbor was 5 miles away. But he also talked about the satisfaction of building something with your own hands, the beauty of the land, the peace of living a simple, honest life. After about an hour, they crested a small hill, and James pulled the horses to a stop. "There," he said, pointing. "That is home." Sarah looked where he indicated and saw a small cabin nestled in a valley, with a barn nearby and a corral holding several horses. Beyond it stretched open grassland dotted with cattle, and in the distance, the mountains rose like giants watching over everything. It was beautiful in a stark, simple way. It was also incredibly isolated. Sarah realized with a jolt that this would be her entire world now. No shops to browse, no neighbors to chat with, no busy streets full of people. Just this cabin, this land, and this man she barely knew. As if reading her thoughts, James spoke quietly. "I know it is not much, and I know it is very different from what you are used to. If you need time to adjust, I understand. There's no rush for anything. Sarah looked at him and saw genuine concern in his eyes. He was nervous too, she realized. This was just as frightening for him as it was for her. It is beautiful, she said, and meant it. James smiled again, that same warm smile that softened his weathered face. He clicked to the horses, and they started down the hill toward what would be Sarah's new home. As the wagon rolled down the hill toward the cabin, Sarah's mind raced with 1,000 thoughts. In 3 days, she would marry this man sitting beside her. 3 days to decide if she could truly go through with this arrangement. If James Hartley was the kind, honest person his letters suggested, or if she had made a terrible mistake. When they reached the cabin, James helped her down from the wagon with a gentle hand. Up close, the buildings looked sturdy and well-maintained. The cabin was small but solid, built from thick logs that had weathered to a silvery gray. Smoke curled from the stone chimney, and Sarah could see curtains in the windows, a feminine touch that surprised her. "My mother made those curtains," James said, noticing where she was looking. "I have kept the cabin much as she left it. I hope that is all right. If you want to change things, you are welcome to do so." 2 men emerged from the barn, both looking curiously at Sarah. James introduced them as Pete and Daniel, ranch hands who helped with the cattle and heavy work. They were polite, but kept their distance, clearly unsure how to act around a woman who would soon be their boss's wife. James showed Sarah inside the cabin, and she was relieved to find it clean and orderly. The main room served as kitchen, dining area, and sitting room all in one. A large stone fireplace dominated one wall, with a good supply of firewood stacked beside it. The kitchen area had a sturdy wood stove, shelves holding basic supplies, and a table with 4 chairs. Simple but functional. There were 2 other rooms. One was clearly James's bedroom, with a large bed covered in a colorful quilt. The other was smaller, with a narrow bed and a few pieces of simple furniture. It was to this room that James carried her carpet bag. "This was my parents' room when they first built the cabin," he explained, setting her bag on the bed. "After my father added the larger bedroom, my mother used this room for sewing and such. It has been empty for some years now, but I cleaned it up for you. I will sleep in the barn until after the wedding. I want you to feel comfortable here, to have time to be certain about this arrangement." Sarah was stunned. She had expected to share a room with him immediately, as many mail-order brides were forced to do. The fact that he was giving her privacy, time, and space spoke volumes about his character. "Thank you," she managed to say. "That is very kind of you." James nodded, looking uncomfortable with her gratitude. "I will let you rest from your journey. There is water in the pitcher for washing, and I will bring in your trunk from the wagon. Supper will be ready in about an hour. Nothing fancy, I am afraid. Just stew and bread." After he left, Sarah sat on the bed and looked around her small room. The reality of her situation was beginning to sink in. She was truly here, in Montana territory, 1,000 miles from everything she had ever known. In 3 days, she would marry James Hartley and become a rancher's wife. This cabin would be her home, this vast empty land her daily view. She unpacked her few belongings, hanging her 2 dresses on pegs in the wall and arranging her other items on the simple dresser. She had brought so little with her, the accumulated possessions of her entire life fitting easily into one small bag. It made her feel unmoored, as if she'd barely existed. That first supper together was awkward but not unpleasant. James had made a simple beef stew that was surprisingly good, and the bread, though dense, was fresh and filling. They ate mostly in silence, occasionally making small talk about the weather or the ranch. Sarah noticed that James had nice table manners, that he ate slowly and tidily, another small detail that eased her worries slightly. After supper, Sarah insisted on washing the dishes despite her exhaustion. James showed her where everything was kept, then excused himself to check on the horses. When he returned, he found Sarah sitting by the fireplace, the warmth of the flames helping to chase away the chill of the spring evening. "Tomorrow, I thought I could show you around the ranch," James said, settling into the chair across from her. "Help you get familiar with everything? The day after, we need to ride into town to see the preacher and make arrangements for the wedding. If that suits you, of course." "Yes, that would be fine," Sarah said. James picked up a book from the small shelf beside his chair and began to read, occasionally glancing at the fire. Sarah watched him, this stranger who would soon be her husband. He seemed content to simply sit quietly, not feeling the need to fill every moment with conversation. She appreciated that. After weeks of constant noise and crowds on the train, the quiet was soothing. Eventually, exhaustion overcame her anxiety, and Sarah excused herself to bed. She lay in the narrow bed, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the Montana night. Wind whispered through the prairie grasses. An owl hooted somewhere in the distance. Cattle lowed softly from the pasture. It was so different from the sounds of Boston, the rumble of carriages, the shouts of street vendors, the constant hum of city life. She thought about her mother, hoping the medicine was still helping. She thought about Emma and Thomas, wondering if they missed her as much as she missed them already. And she thought about James, sitting in the other room reading his book, a man who had shown her more consideration in one evening than most men she had known showed women in a lifetime. The next morning, Sarah woke to the smell of coffee and frying bacon. She dressed quickly and found James in the kitchen, cooking breakfast with practiced efficiency. "Good morning," he greeted her. "I hope I did not wake you too early. I am used to rising with the sun." "No, it is fine. I am used to early mornings from the factory," Sarah said. Over breakfast, James outlined the day ahead. He would show her the ranch, introduce her to the animals, and explain the daily routines. Sarah ate quickly, eager to learn about her new home. True to his word, James spent the morning showing her everything. The barn housed 6 horses, which James introduced by name as if they were old friends. There was Dusty, his primary riding horse, a patient mare named Bella, who he thought would be good for Sarah to learn on, and 4 others used for various ranch work. The chicken coop held 24 hens and 1 proud rooster. James explained how to collect eggs and scatter feed, demonstrating the tasks as he talked. Sarah watched carefully, committing everything to memory. They walked out to where the cattle grazed, about 50 head scattered across the grassland. James explained the seasonal routines, the challenges of keeping them safe from predators and harsh weather, the economics of raising beef cattle. Sarah listened intently, asking questions when she did not understand something. What struck her most was how much work it all required. James was not exaggerating when he said ranch life was hard. Every animal needed daily care. Fences needed constant mending. Water had to be hauled. Wood had to be chopped and stacked. The garden plot needed preparing for planting. The list went on and on. "I know it seems overwhelming," James said, watching her face. "But you do not need to learn everything at once. We will work together, and I will teach you gradually." "I am not afraid of hard work," Sarah said firmly. "I worked 12-hour shifts in a textile factory. I can handle whatever needs doing here." James smiled at that. "I believe you can. You have a strong spirit, Sarah Mitchell. I could see that in your letters." As they walked back toward the cabin, Sarah asked, "Why did you decide to look for a mail-order bride? Surely there are women here in Montana who would have married you." James was quiet for a moment, considering his answer. "There are not many unmarried women in these parts, and those who are here have known me since childhood. They see me as the quiet boy who lost his parents and lives alone on a struggling ranch. I wanted a fresh start with someone, a chance to build something new without old assumptions getting in the way." "And why me?" Sarah asked. "You must have received other letters." "I did receive a few others," James admitted. "But yours was different. You were honest about your situation, about why you needed to leave Boston. Did not pretend to be something you were not. And you mentioned your family, your responsibilities to them. That told me you were a person who took commitment seriously. That mattered to me more than anything else." That afternoon, James taught Sarah to ride. He saddled Bella, the gentle mare, and showed Sarah how to mount. Her first attempts were clumsy and awkward, and she nearly fell off twice. But James was patient, offering calm instruction and steady encouragement. "You are doing well for your first time," he assured her as she clung nervously to the saddle. "Most people fall off completely on their first try. You have good balance." By the end of the hour, Sarah could walk the horse around the corral without help. Her legs ached from gripping the saddle, and she knew she would be sore tomorrow, but she felt a small glow of accomplishment. That evening, as they sat down to another simple meal, Sarah found herself relaxing more in James's presence. He was easy to be around, never demanding or pushy, content with comfortable silences, but also willing to talk when she initiated conversation. The second day followed a similar pattern. James showed her how to milk the cow, how to pump water from the well, how to manage the wood stove for cooking. He taught her to recognize different types of clouds and what they meant for the weather. He pointed out landmarks she could use to navigate around the ranch property. Sarah absorbed it all like a sponge. Every skill she learned was one more step toward being a useful partner in this enterprise. She was determined not to be a burden, to pull her own weight. That afternoon, they rode into town to meet with Reverend Thomas and arrange for the wedding. The town of Bozeman was small, but bustling, with perhaps 20 buildings lining the main street. James introduced Sarah to several people, describing her simply as his intended bride. Some looked curious, others approving, a few skeptical. Sarah held her head high and met their gazes steadily. Reverend Thomas was a kind older man with white hair and gentle eyes. He spoke with them about the seriousness of marriage vows, about the commitment they were undertaking. He asked Sarah directly if she was entering this marriage of her own free will, if she understood what she was agreeing to. Sarah appreciated that he cared enough to ask to make sure she was not being coerced. "Yes, Reverend," she said clearly. "I am choosing this freely." The wedding was set for the following afternoon at the small church. James bought fabric so Sarah could make a simple dress for the occasion, and he ordered supplies they would need for the coming weeks. Sarah noticed he was not extravagant, but neither was he stingy. He bought good quality items that would last. On the ride back to the ranch, Sarah felt the weight of what was about to happen settling over her. Tomorrow she would become Mrs. James Hartley. Tomorrow her life would change forever. That night, after supper, James sat across from her by the fire and spoke seriously. "Sarah, I want you to know that if you have any doubts, if you want more time, we can delay the wedding, or if you decide this is not what you want, I will give you money for a train ticket back east. I will not hold you to this arrangement if you are not certain." Sarah looked at this kind, honest man who had shown her nothing but respect and consideration. She thought about her options, really thought about them. She could go back to Boston, back to the factory and the crushing poverty and watching her mother die slowly, or she could take a chance on this new life, this partnership with a man who seemed to value her as a person. "I am certain," she said quietly. "I want to go through with the wedding." James nodded, relief clear on his face. "Then tomorrow, you will become my wife, and I promise you, Sarah, I will do my best to be a good husband to you. I may not always know the right thing to say or do, but I will always try to treat you with kindness and respect." "That is all I can ask for," Sarah replied. The next morning dawned clear and bright. Sarah put on her new dress, simple but pretty, made from the fabric James had bought. She pinned her hair up carefully, wishing she had a mirror to check her appearance. When she emerged from her room, James stood waiting in his best suit, holding a small bouquet of wildflowers he had picked that morning. His eyes widened when he saw her. "You look beautiful," he said softly. They rode to town together, Pete and Daniel following in another wagon to serve as witnesses. The church was small and plain, but someone had decorated it with more wildflowers. A few townspeople had gathered, curious to see the mail-order bride marry the quiet rancher. Reverend Thomas performed the ceremony with warmth and sincerity. Sarah spoke her vows clearly, meaning every word. When James slipped the simple gold ring onto her finger, the one that had belonged to his mother, she felt the weight of the commitment she was making. "You may kiss your bride," Reverend Thomas said. James leaned in and pressed a gentle, brief kiss to her lips. It was Sarah's first kiss, and though it was quick and chaste, it felt significant. A promise of things to come. And just like that, Sarah Mitchell became Sarah Hartley, a rancher's wife in Montana Territory, embarking on a new life with a man who had offered her not just shelter, but genuine respect and partnership. The first months of marriage were an adjustment for both Sarah and James. After the simple wedding ceremony, they returned to the ranch as husband and wife, and Sarah moved her few belongings into the larger bedroom they would now share. That first night, James was gentle and patient with her, understanding her nervousness and treating her with care and consideration. It set the tone for their marriage, a partnership built on mutual respect rather than demands or expectations. Life on the ranch followed a relentless rhythm dictated by the needs of animals in the changing seasons. Sarah woke each morning before dawn to help James with the endless list of chores. She learned to make bread from scratch, kneading the dough until her arms ached. She mastered the art of cooking on the temperamental wood stove, learning which dampers to adjust for different temperatures. She collected eggs from the chickens, who initially pecked at her hands, but eventually grew accustomed to her presence. The work was harder than anything she had done in the factory. Her hands, already calloused from textile work, developed new calluses from hauling water and chopping vegetables and scrubbing laundry on a washboard. Her back ached from bending over the garden, pulling weeds and planting seeds. Her legs were constantly sore from learning to ride and walk the uneven terrain of the ranch, but despite the physical exhaustion, Sarah found herself happier than she had been in years. There was something deeply satisfying about this kind of work. Unlike the factory, where she had been just another replaceable body operating a machine, here her efforts directly contributed to their survival and comfort. When she cooked a good meal, she saw James enjoy it. When she tended the garden, she watched vegetables grow from seeds she had planted. The connection between effort and result was immediate and tangible. James proved to be a patient teacher. When Sarah struggled with a task, he never criticized or showed frustration. Instead, he would demonstrate again, breaking complex tasks into smaller steps, encouraging her when she wanted to give up. "Learning to rope took me 2 years," he told her one afternoon when she was frustrated by her inability to catch a wandering calf. "And I grew up around cattle. You've been here 3 months and can already handle most ranch tasks. You are doing better than you think." As spring turned to summer, Sarah's riding improved dramatically. She could now saddle Bella herself, mount without assistance, and ride out to check on the cattle. James taught her to read the signs of illness or injury in the animals, to spot a fence that needed mending, to understand the land and its patterns. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink, Sarah asked James about his parents. "What were they like?" she said softly. James was quiet for a long moment, his eyes on the distant mountains. "My father was a tough man, but fair. He believed in hard work and keeping your word above all else. My mother balanced him out. She was gentler, always seeing the best in people. They loved each other deeply, even after 25 years of marriage." How did they end up here? In Montana? They came west in 1865, right after the war ended. My father had fought for the Union and saw too much death and destruction. He wanted to build something new, something peaceful. They homesteaded this land when it was nothing but wild prairie. Built the cabin with their own hands, cleared fields, raised cattle from a small herd they drove all the way from Missouri. It must have been incredibly difficult for them. It was. My mother told me there were times that first winter when they nearly gave up, when they wondered if they would survive until spring. But they persevered, and slowly the ranch began to thrive. James paused, his voice growing thick with emotion. When the cholera came through in 1878, it took them both within a week of each other. I was 25, suddenly alone, with a ranch to run and no idea how to manage without them. Sarah reached over and took his hand. "I am sorry you lost them. Thank you. It was hard those first few years alone. The ranch struggled. I made mistakes, lost cattle to harsh winters in my own inexperience. There were times I thought about selling everything and going back east. But this place, this land, it was their legacy. I could not let it fail." "You have done well," Sarah said. "They would be proud of what you have built here." James squeezed her hand. "I hope so, and I hope they would approve of you. I think my mother would have liked you very much." As summer progressed, Sarah began to feel truly at home on the ranch. She developed routines and rhythms, finding efficiency in her tasks. She started making small improvements to the cabin, sewing new curtains, organizing the kitchen more effectively, planting flowers near the door. James encouraged all of it, happy to see her making the space her own. Sarah also began writing regular letters to her family back in Boston. True to his word, James gave her money to send east each month. It was not a large amount, but it was steady and reliable. Her aunt wrote back that the medicine was helping her mother, that Emma was doing well in school, that Thomas had found work helping at a stable instead of going to the factory. The letters from home were bittersweet. Sarah was glad her family was managing, but she missed them terribly. She wondered if Emma had grown taller, if Thomas's voice had finished changing, if her mother was getting stronger, or just pretending for Sarah's sake. One night in late July, Sarah woke to find James's side of the bed empty. She rose and found him sitting on the porch in the moonlight, staring out at the silent landscape. "Cannot sleep?" she asked, settling beside him. "Thinking too much," he admitted. "Summer is half over. Soon we will need to prepare for winter, make sure we have enough hay stored, enough wood chopped, enough supplies laid in. Winter here can be brutal, Sarah. Last year we were snowed in for nearly 2 months straight." "Then we will prepare," Sarah said simply. "Tell me what needs to be done and we will do it together." James looked at her, and even in the dim moonlight she could see the gratitude in his eyes. "Together," he repeated. "I am still getting used to that word. To not being alone in all of this." "You are not alone anymore," Sarah said, taking his hand. "We are partners in this, remember?" "For better or worse," as the Reverend said. Over the following weeks, they worked harder than ever, preparing for the coming winter. They cut and stacked hay in the barn. They chopped and stored wood until Sarah's shoulders burned with fatigue. They harvested vegetables from the garden, and Sarah learned to preserve them through canning and pickling, skills James's mother had taught him years ago. It was during this time of intense work that Sarah truly began to appreciate James as more than just a kind man who had offered her escape from Boston. She saw his dedication, his work ethic, his careful planning. She saw how he cared for the animals, never harsh or cruel even when they were difficult. She saw how he treated Pete and Daniel with respect, paying them fairly and never asking them to do work he would not do himself. And slowly, what had started as a practical arrangement based on mutual need began to transform into something deeper. Sarah found herself watching James as he worked, admiring the strength in his arms as he lifted hay bales, the concentration on his face as he repaired a broken fence, the gentleness in his hands as he treated an injured horse. One August evening, a severe thunderstorm rolled across the prairie. The wind howled and rain lashed against the cabin walls. Lightning cracked across the sky in brilliant, terrifying displays. Sarah had never experienced a storm like this, so violent and wild. In Boston, buildings provided shelter and protection. Here, the cabin suddenly felt very small and fragile. James noticed her fear and came to sit beside her, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. "It is frightening, I know, but the cabin is solid. We are safe here." They sat together, watching the storm rage through the window, and then, during a particularly loud crack of thunder, Sarah turned to James and kissed him. Not the brief, chaste kiss from their wedding, but a real kiss, full of emotion and meaning. When they pulled apart, James looked at her with wonder. "Sarah?" "I care about you," she said simply. "This marriage started as an arrangement, as a solution to problems we both had. But somewhere along the way it became more than that. Somewhere along the way I started to fall in love with you." James cupped her face in his calloused hands. "I have loved you since the day you arrived and faced this wild, lonely place with such courage. I was just afraid to say it, afraid you might not feel the same." "I feel the same," Sarah whispered. That night, as the storm raged outside, something shifted in their marriage. The careful politeness and respectful distance gave way to genuine intimacy and affection. They were no longer just partners sharing a home and work. They were truly husband and wife, bound together by growing love. As autumn arrived and the leaves on the few scattered trees turned gold, Sarah received a letter that changed everything. It was from her aunt in Boston, and the news was devastating. Her mother had taken a turn for the worse. The tuberculosis had spread to her lungs severely, and the doctor said she might not survive the winter. Sarah sat at the kitchen table, tears streaming down her face as she read and reread the letter. James found her there and immediately knelt beside her chair. "What is wrong? What happened?" Through her sobs, Sarah explained, "My mother is dying, James. Really dying this time. And I am here, 1,000 miles away, and I cannot do anything to help her. I cannot even say goodbye." James held her as she cried, his own heart breaking at her pain. When her tears finally subsided, he spoke quietly. "What if we brought them here? Your mother, Emma, Thomas? What if they came to live with us on the ranch?" Sarah pulled back to look at him. "What?" "James, that is impossible. How would we manage?" "Where would they stay? And the journey might kill my mother in her condition." "We would make it work," James said firmly. "We could add another room to the cabin. It would not be fancy, but it would be shelter. And the clean air here, away from the city smoke and crowds, it might help your mother. It certainly could not hurt. But the expense, James? 4 more people to feed and house. The train tickets alone would cost a fortune. We have some savings. And we can manage with less. I have been thinking about expanding the herd anyway, buying some young cattle to raise. We could delay that and use the money for your family instead." Sarah stared at her husband, overwhelmed by his generosity. "You would do that? You would take on that burden for me?" "Sarah, they are your family. That makes them my family too now. And it is not a burden. It is what families do for each other. Besides, I like the idea of this place being full of life again, of children's voices and laughter. It has been too quiet here for too long." Over the next few days, they made plans. James would ride into town and send a telegram to Sarah's aunt with their offer. If her family agreed, they would book passage on the train for early October before winter made travel too dangerous. Meanwhile, James and Pete would begin building an addition to the cabin, a small room that could house Emma and Thomas, while Sarah's mother could take the small bedroom Sarah had used when she first arrived. The telegram response came within a week. Sarah's aunt agreed immediately, relieved to have the burden lifted. The journey would be difficult for Sarah's mother, but the doctor thought she might survive it if they took it slowly and carefully. They would arrive in Bozeman in 3 weeks. James and Pete worked tirelessly to complete the new room. They cut and hauled logs, built a sturdy frame, chinked the gaps against the cold. Sarah sewed curtains and blankets, prepared bedding, stocked extra food supplies. Daniel helped hunt and preserve meat for the winter, knowing they would need much more with additional mouths to feed. As Sarah worked, she marveled at what was happening. 6 months ago, she had been a desperate factory girl with no options and no hope. Now she was a rancher's wife, preparing to welcome her family to a new home in Montana territory, and all because a lonely cowboy had offered her not just shelter and survival, but genuine partnership and love. Man, the transformation in James was equally remarkable. The quiet, solitary man who had lived alone for years was enthusiastically preparing to fill his home with family. He talked excitedly about teaching Thomas ranch work, about making sure Emma continued her education, about doing everything possible to help Sarah's mother recover her health. "This is right," he he told Sarah one evening as they surveyed the nearly completed addition. "This ranch was meant to be a family home. My parents built it with that dream. For too long it has been just me rattling around in empty rooms. Your family will bring it back to life." Sarah kissed him, her heart full of love and gratitude for this man who had become so much more than she ever expected. "Thank you," she whispered, "for everything. For taking the chance on a desperate girl from Boston. For being so much kinder and better than you needed to be. For loving not just me, but my family too." "Thank you for saying yes," James replied. "For being brave enough to come west to marry a stranger. For working so hard to build this life with me. For making this house feel like a real home." As October approached, and the day of her family's arrival drew near, Sarah felt a mixture of excitement and nervousness. How would her siblings react to this new life? Would her mother's health improve or continue to decline? Could they all really make this arrangement work? But one thing she knew for certain. Whatever challenges lay ahead, she and James would face them together, as true partners, bound by love and commitment and the shared determination to build something lasting and good. The morning Sarah's family was scheduled to arrive, she woke before dawn, too nervous and excited to sleep. She dressed quickly and checked everything in the cabin for the 10th time. The new room was ready with 2 narrow beds for Emma and Thomas. The small bedroom had fresh linens and extra blankets for her mother. Sarah had cooked enough food to feed an army, worried that her family would arrive hungry from the long journey. James found her anxiously rearranging items on the kitchen shelves that did not need rearranging. He gently took her hands and made her sit down at the table. "Sarah, everything is perfect. Your family will be grateful just to be here, to be together again. Stop worrying. What if Mama is too weak from the journey? What if the children hate it here? What if Thomas refuses to stay and wants to go back to Boston? What if—" James pressed a finger to her lips, smiling. "What if we deal with problems as they come instead of inventing new ones to worry about? Come, we need to leave soon if we want to meet the afternoon train. The ride into Bozeman seemed to take forever, though it was the same hour-long journey Sarah had made many times now. She could not stop fidgeting, smoothing her skirt, checking her hair, twisting her hands together nervously. When they finally reached the station, Sarah jumped down from the wagon before James had even fully stopped. She paced the platform, watching the eastern horizon for any sign of smoke from the approaching train. "There," James said, pointing. In the distance, a black plume of smoke rose against the clear blue sky. Sarah's heart hammered in her chest as the train grew closer, the sound of its engine growing louder. When it finally pulled into the station with a screech of brakes and a hiss of steam, she scanned the windows desperately, looking for familiar faces. Then she saw them. Emma appeared in one of the doorways, looking around with wide, frightened eyes. She was taller than Sarah remembered, nearly a young woman now at 11 years old. Behind her came Thomas, 13 now and gangly, struggling with 2 battered suitcases. And finally, supported by a porter, came their mother. Sarah's breath caught in her throat. Her mother had aged terribly in the 6 months since Sarah had left Boston. She was painfully thin, her face pale and drawn, moving slowly and carefully as if every step required great effort. But when she saw Sarah, her face lit up with such joy that years seemed to fall away. "Mama." Sarah ran forward, embracing her mother gently, afraid of hurting her fragile frame. "You made it. You are here." "My darling girl," her mother whispered, tears streaming down her face. "Let me look at you." "Oh, Sarah, you look so healthy, so happy." "Montana agrees with you." Emma and Thomas crowded in for hugs, all of them crying and laughing at once. James hung back respectfully, giving them their moment of reunion. Finally, Sarah remembered her manners and turned to introduce him. "Mama, Emma, Thomas, this is my husband, James Hartley." Her mother looked at James with sharp, assessing eyes despite her illness. James stepped forward and carefully took her hand, bowing slightly. "Mitchell, it is an honor to finally meet you. Sarah speaks of you often and with great love. Welcome to Montana. Welcome to your new home." Her mother's expression softened. "Mr. Hartley, I cannot thank you enough for your kindness to my family. Taking us in like this, it is more than we had any right to expect. Family takes care of family," James said simply. "You are Sarah's mother, which makes you my mother now too. And these are my brother and sister." He turned to Emma and Thomas, offering his hand to shake. "I am pleased to meet you both. I hope you will come to like ranch life." Thomas shook his hand uncertainly, clearly overwhelmed by everything. Emma just stared at James with wide eyes, then whispered to Sarah, "He is very tall." The journey back to the ranch was crowded with all 5 of them squeezed into the wagon, but nobody minded. Sarah's mother sat between Sarah and James, wrapped in blankets against the October chill. Emma and Thomas perched in the back with the luggage, looking around at the vast landscape with a mixture of wonder and uncertainty. "It is so empty," Thomas said, staring at the endless prairie. "Where are all the buildings? Where are the people? This is ranch country," James explained. "Our nearest neighbor is 5 miles away. But you will get used to it. There is a kind of peace in all this open space that you cannot find in a crowded city." When they crested the hill and the ranch came into view, Sarah watched her family's reactions anxiously. The cabin looked very small compared to what they were used to and very isolated, but her mother surprised her by smiling. "It is beautiful, Sarah. So peaceful. I can already breathe easier here than in Boston." Over the next few days, Sarah's family settled into their new home. Her mother was installed in the small bedroom, where she could rest quietly. Emma and Thomas shared the new addition, though Thomas complained about having to share with his little sister. The adjustment was not easy for anyone. Emma cried herself to sleep the first few nights, overwhelmed by the strangeness of everything and missing her friends from Boston. Thomas sulked and refused to help with chores, insisting this was not his home and he would return to Boston as soon as he was old enough. But James showed remarkable patience with both of them. He did not force Thomas to work, but instead invited him to come along and learn if he was interested. He showed Emma where the chickens laid their eggs and let her name each one. He treated them with kindness and respect, never talking down to them or dismissing their feelings. Slowly, things began to improve. Thomas's curiosity got the better of his stubbornness, and he started following James around asking questions about the cattle and horses. James taught him to ride, to rope, to read weather signs and animal tracks. Within a month, Thomas was eagerly helping with ranch work, proud of each new skill he mastered. Emma found companionship with Sarah, helping in the kitchen and garden. She also discovered she had a natural way with animals. The chickens that had pecked at Sarah for weeks came readily to Emma's hand. Even the horses seemed calmer around her. As for Sarah's mother, the change in environment seemed almost miraculous. The clean mountain air, the lack of factory smoke and city pollution, the wholesome food and quiet rest all contributed to a gradual improvement in her health. She still coughed, and Sarah knew that tuberculosis would likely never fully leave her, but she grew stronger. Color returned to her cheeks. She began to sit on the porch in the afternoons, enjoying the sunshine and fresh air. Winter came early that year, with the first snow falling in mid-November. James had prepared well, and the expanded cabin stayed warm and cozy, even as temperatures dropped and snow piled high outside. The family settled into comfortable routines. James and Thomas handled the outdoor work, caring for animals and maintaining the ranch. Sarah, Emma, and her mother managed the household, cooking, cleaning, and doing the endless tasks required to keep everyone fed and clothed. The long winter evenings were spent together by the fireplace. James would read aloud from books while Sarah and her mother sewed, and Emma practiced her letters. Thomas whittled small figures from scraps of wood, a skill James had taught him. Sometimes they sang songs or told stories. Sometimes they just sat in companionable silence, enjoying the warmth and each other's presence. Sarah often found herself looking around at her family in these moments, her heart full to bursting with gratitude and happiness. She thought about the desperate, frightened girl she had been just a year ago, working herself to death in a Boston factory with no hope for a better future. That girl could never have imagined this life, this warmth, this sense of belonging and peace. One evening in December, after the children had gone to bed and her mother had retired early, Sarah and James sat alone by the fire. Snow was falling softly outside, visible through the window in the lamplight. "Are you happy?" James asked quietly, taking her hand. "Happier than I ever thought possible," Sarah answered honestly. "A year ago, I was answering an advertisement from a desperate stranger, hoping for nothing more than survival. Now I have a home, a husband I love, my family around me. It is more than I ever dared dream of. I am the one who got the better end of this bargain," James said. "I was looking for a wife, someone to share the work and the loneliness. Instead, I got you, and a ready-made family to fill this house with life and laughter. The ranch feels alive again, the way it did when my parents were here." Sarah leaned her head on his shoulder. "Do you ever regret it, taking on so many people, so much responsibility?" "Never. Not for a single moment." James kissed the top of her head. "You and your family are the best thing that ever happened to me." As winter deepened, Thomas proved himself to be a natural rancher. He learned quickly and worked hard, never complaining about the cold or the difficult tasks. James began treating him less like a boy and more like a partner, asking his opinions and trusting him with important responsibilities. Thomas grew inches that winter, his voice deepening, his shoulders broadening from hard work. He stopped talking about returning to Boston. Emma blossomed as well. The frightened, grieving little girl transformed into a cheerful, confident young lady. She still missed her friends from Boston, but she made new friends among the few neighboring ranch families. She learned to ride almost as well as Thomas, and she took over complete care of the chickens and the kitchen garden. Sarah's mother became the heart of their home. Though she could not do heavy work, she managed the household with quiet efficiency. She taught Emma to sew beautiful stitches. She shared recipes and wisdom with Sarah. She sat on the porch on warmer days and called out encouragement to Thomas as he practiced roping fence posts. One spring evening, as new life was emerging all around the ranch with calves being born and seeds sprouting in the garden, Sarah's mother called her over to sit beside her on the porch. "I want to thank you," her mother said, taking Sarah's hand. "For what, Mama? For saving us? For having the courage to come out here and marry a stranger so that you could help your family? For bringing us here when we had nowhere else to go? You gave us all a second chance at life." "James is the one who deserves thanks," Sarah protested. "He is the one who opened his home and his heart to all of us. James is a good man, and I thank God every day that you found him. But it was your bravery that started everything. You were only 18 years old, and you traveled across the country to marry someone you had never met, all because you were trying to take care of your family. It took remarkable courage." Sarah's eyes filled with tears. "I was terrified every moment. I had no idea if I was making the right choice. The best decisions in life are often the scariest ones," her mother said wisely. "And you made a very good choice. James loves you, truly loves you. I see it in how he looks at you, how he speaks to you, how he considers your feelings in every decision. I found real love, Sarah, not just a practical arrangement." "I know. I am very blessed." Her mother squeezed her hand. "You made your own blessings through your courage and your willingness to take a chance on something unknown. I am so proud of the woman you have become." That summer, Thomas celebrated his 14th birthday, and James surprised him by giving him his own horse, a young gelding that Thomas had been training. Thomas was so overwhelmed he could barely speak, just threw his arms around James in a fierce hug. "Thank you," he managed to choke out. "You have been more of a father to me this past year than I ever expected. I know I was difficult at first, but I want you to know that I am grateful. For everything." James hugged him back, his own eyes suspiciously bright. "You are a good young man, Thomas. I am proud to call you my brother." That fall, a neighboring rancher with a daughter close to Thomas's age started finding excuses to visit more frequently. James and Sarah exchanged knowing looks but said nothing, watching with amusement as young romance began to bloom. As the years passed, the ranch continued to grow and prosper. With Thomas's help, James was able to expand the herd. They built a larger barn and additional corrals. Sarah's garden produced abundantly, and she learned to preserve enough food to last through even the harshest winters. 10 years after Sarah had first arrived in Montana as a frightened mail-order bride, she stood on the porch of their now much expanded home, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant colors. Her daughter Clara, 3 years old, played at her feet with a rag doll her grandmother had sewn. Inside the house, her mother sang softly while preparing supper, her health much improved though she would never be fully strong again. Emma, now a beautiful young woman of 21, was in town teaching at the new school that had opened. Thomas, 23 and married to that neighboring rancher's daughter, lived in a cabin he and James had built on the adjacent property James had purchased to expand the ranch. Sarah heard footsteps behind her and felt strong arms wrap around her waist. James rested his chin on her shoulder, and together they watched their 7-year-old son Jacob help Thomas in the distance, learning to mend a fence. "What are you thinking about?" James asked softly. "About how far we have come," Sarah said. "About how different life is from what I imagined when I answered your advertisement all those years ago. Better or worse than you expected?" Sarah turned in his arms to face him. "So much better. I thought I was looking for survival, for a way to help my family. I never imagined I would find this, a true home, a real partnership, genuine love." James kissed her forehead. "I never imagined any of it either. I thought I was looking for someone to help with chores and keep me company. Instead, I got a wife who became my best friend, a ready-made family who filled my empty house with love, and children of our own. I got a real life, Sarah. A full, rich, meaningful life." Sarah looked out at the ranch, at the land they had worked so hard to build into something prosperous and beautiful. She thought about that desperate 18-year-old girl boarding a train to marry a stranger, so frightened and uncertain. She wished she could go back and tell that girl that everything would work out better than she could possibly imagine. The mail-order bride arrangement had started as a transaction, a practical solution to desperate circumstances. But it had become so much more. It had become a love story, a tale of two people who took a chance on each other and built something beautiful from their shared commitment and growing affection. Sarah had learned that sometimes the most desperate decisions lead to the most unexpected blessings. She had learned that real love is not about grand gestures or fairy tale romance, but about choosing each day to honor your commitments, to treat each other with kindness and respect, to build something together through hard work and dedication. She had come west seeking survival and found so much more. She had found a place where she truly belonged, where she was valued not just for what she could do, but for who she was. She had found a partner who saw her as an equal, who respected her opinions and her contributions. She had found a home not just in a physical place, but in the hearts of people who loved her. As the sun dipped below the horizon and the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, Sarah leaned against her husband and smiled. The cowboy had offered her love, not just shelter, and in accepting his offer, she had found everything she had ever needed and more than she had ever dared hope for. Their story had started with a simple advertisement in a Boston newspaper, but it had become a testament to the power of courage, compassion, and the kind of love that grows slowly and steadily through shared struggles and triumphs. It was a story worth telling, a reminder that sometimes taking a leap of faith into the unknown can lead you exactly where you were always meant to be.